So, J. Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. The Box Hill Picnic.
I'll need another one.
Well, you'll get one.
Welcome to Between the Covers, the podcast in which my husband, author of the Merlin Mystery Series and the Robin Hood Mystery Series, J. Ruud, is building his list of the 100 most lovable novels in the English language, one episode at a time. And I am the facilitator of the discussion, and I am Stacey Margaret Jones, author of Mr. Catherine. So today we're going to be talking about a novel that has a Box Hill picnic in it. All right, there's faint echoes in the back of my mind, so I hope I get it by the time you've given me all of the clues. What is my second hint?
Second hint is Mr. Elton.
Oh, Emma by Jane Austen.
Emma it is.
I thought maybe it was either Emma or the screenplay of Clueless by Amy Heckerling.
Which is not a novel, hence would not be on my list.
But it can be read. Anyway, because Elton, of course, is a character who transfers quite directly from the novel to the movie Clueless. There is an Elton character. All right, so before we do the list of lists, as it's become, and before you accept the down and dirty challenge, let's do a few factoids about the book. So, Emma by Jane Austen. About when was this published?
This was Jane Austen's final novel published during her lifetime. It was published in 1815.
Okay.
And two of her novels, Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, were published posthumously in 1818.
What was the first novel she published?
Sense and Sensibility, I think, was the first.
Is this the second Jane Austen book on your list?
Yes. Now, I have made no secret of my desire in the list of the 100 most lovable novels in the English language to include as many different authors as I could to spread the love among a variety
as one should do.
Of periods and styles. But in the end, there were two particular novelists whose contributions to literature in English were so prodigious that I couldn't bring myself to represent them with only one single novel. And one of these was Jane Austen.
All right. So did we have Pride and Prejudice?
Pride and Prejudice.
Was that episode number 1?
It was our first episode ever.
Awesome.
And it is currently ranked as number 2 on the list.
It didn't do a lot of slipping.
It did not. It has not slipped. Well, it was originally number 1 because it was the first book that we talked about.
I get how that works. Okay, and how long about is this book?
Well, it depends on the edition that you read.
Of course.
For instance, the Norton Critical Edition, which is what I originally read, is like 330 pages. But I think most of the time it's going to be about 400 pages.
So it was really packed in there in your...
Really small print, yeah.
I have that hardcover Jane Austen collection.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll tell you, it seems like a good idea in the store, but it's not that pleasurable to read because the book is so heavy because it has all of her novels in it. Yeah. And it's certainly not a book you're going to travel with. And even just to lie in bed and read it at night, it's like so heavy on your stomach. It's like I said, it seems like a great idea, but also I think the print in that is pretty small.
Yeah.
So, but I think I read every Jane Austen novel I've read, which I think I've read all of them, and I read them out of that book. So, I recommend getting individual copies.
Yeah, that's usually handier.
All right. So, let's talk about the list of lists. So, you're building your list of the 100 most lovable novels in the English language, which is novels that are not only, some of them are quote unquote good for you or, giants in the canon, but you pick the novels that you just really love to read and you think other people will enjoy reading them.
That's true.
And you've done this a number of ways. Obviously, you're thinking of your favorites, but also you've read through a lot of other people's compilations of the novels that are good, the best in English.
Yeah.
So who else likes Emma?
Well, most people like Emma. She's on all kinds of lists. Emma was on The Guardian's list of the best novels written in English, The Observer's list of the 100 greatest world novels. Emma also appears on the BBC's catalog of 100 greatest British novels, which was a list compiled for the BBC by Jane Chabatari, who surveyed 82 literary critics from around the world, none of them British themselves, for a list of which novels by British writers were the most esteemed in the eyes of the world.
Wow.
And Emma came in as number 19 on that list. It was 83rd in the top 100 books as chosen by Canadians, 75th on the Australian Big Read, 55th on the 100 favorite novels of librarians, 40th on the BBC's Big Read, and number 8 on The Guardian's 50 best-loved novels written by a woman.
Awesome. All right. So lots of bigwigs.
Lots of love.
Lots of love from the bigwigs.
And all over, not obviously, not just England and America.
Even though it's about a very specific place and time and very specific people within the place and time.
Yes.
She does, I mean, we'll get into this when we talk about the book, but she has a way of making her characters relatable universally, I think, obviously, because of that. Well, let's see. Can you accomplish the down and dirty summary? Will you achieve the harps of glory or the trombones of distress?
We'll find out. So this novel, set in the small fictional village of Highbury, follows the relationships among the most important families in that tiny village, which is itself, as you implied, a microcosm of early 19th century society in Regency England. Austen created a character who she wrote, "No one but myself will much like." And for much of the novel, you may feel the same way. Emma enters our perceptions with the book's first sentence. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress and vex her. So we meet this young woman who is spoiled, vain, and used to being admired and having her opinion flattered and agreed to by nearly everyone in her small pond of Highbury, in which she's the biggest fish. And in short, the story follows Emma's attempts after successfully having matched her governess, Miss Taylor, with her neighbor, Mr. Weston, decides to turn her matchmaking skills to a bigger challenge, finding a superior match that will allow her new orphan friend, Harriet Smith, to marry up.
All right.
And that's the down and dirty.
All right. I'm going to give you harps of glory for that. And, you know, I can't help it, but when you talk about Emma, even though I read the novel and loved the novel, I have 3 movies in my mind because we're the Gwyneth Paltrow movie, which I still think is exquisite. Clueless, which is a modern retelling where Cher Horowitz, played by Alicia Silverstone, is the Emma character, rich, beautiful, and she does have a few things, like her mother has died. It's just,
Emma hasn't had a mother for quite some time, but she has had a governess who's sort of in that role.
And her father is doting, and
her father's quite a character,
also in the movie. And then the recent Emma adaptation that starred Anna Taylor-Joy, or that's her name, I think.
You are absolutely right. It's Anya Taylor-Joy.
Anya Taylor-Joy. And that had a lot of original music in it that was really charming, I thought, too. And I thought did a lot to really recreate maybe some of the motifs of the early 1800s.
I was going to talk about movies
I'm sorry, I can't.
toward the end, but yeah, I mean, the Clueless was made in 1995, and it's set in a Beverly Hills high school, which suggests something about the universality of the characters in Emma, because they're basically translated into this late 20th century high school,
But
in
very
America.
rich, really rich kids.
Very rich kids. We can talk about Emma in
Right.
that sense later. But it was the next year that the Gwyneth Paltrow movie came out.
Oh, I thought that came before Clueless, but
No,
it was after.
1996, a year later.
How fan? Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, it was 2 years before Gwyneth Paltrow won the Academy Award for playing the actor that played Hamlet.
Oh, right.
In
Shakespeare
in Love.
Okay, all right.
And that's where she won her Academy Award.
Yeah.
And then most recently in 2020, the first-time director, Autumn De Wilde, made that movie. And that movie has beautiful cinematography and a very innovative use of music.
Exactly.
as
There's a
you
lot
said.
of original music, or
Well,
also,
a lot of it is traditional.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
like-
Music that's from the era.
Yeah,
That the
or-
characters would have sung or played.
yeah,
or-
English folk songs.
yeah.
mainly.
And the soundtrack, honestly, is quite beautiful. I love
Yeah.
it.
And that movie includes some really memorable performances
Yes.
by Bill Nighy as
Yes.
Emma's father.
Now, see, also a very good cast, very good casting for her
Yeah.
father, because Bill Nighy is never not quite a character.
And he's definitely quite a character.
Always charming.
And
All right.
Miranda Hart plays Miss Bates in that movie. And she's very memorable too.
Yes.
She's that kind of she's the annoyingly chattering aunt
Yes.
of Jane Fairfax.
And there's a Miss Bates in Clueless who is one of the teachers at the school that that Cher, a.k.a. Emma, tries to make a match for.
Ah,
So,
well, that's interesting.
yes.
Because she has no desire to create a match for Miss Bates.
I know,
in
it's
in
different, but-
in the novel.
I think, anyway, so we're getting a little off
But
track,
but here's one thing where I think that last film kind of falls short. Well, there's two things I think. One is that there are hordes of servants around Emma and around Knightley, her aristocratic neighbor, in their huge manor houses, and those have no equivalent in Austen's novel. We know that Emma is handsome, clever, and rich, but she's not that rich.
she's not titled. She's not nobility.
No, but that movie seems to place her in that category.
Right, because that's, I mean, especially with like Pride and Prejudice, they have assets, but they also they have limited assets,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, they're kind of big fish in small ponds.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, the men with titles or the men with great fortunes are kind of these prizes, right?
Yeah.
Or the men who pose as if they have these things.
Yeah.
Right? Because these families are not those people.
Yeah, and also there's the problem of entailment. The reason that the 5 Bennett sisters in Pride and Prejudice have to find a husband is
Right.
they're going to be disinherited
Right.
when their father dies.
They're not going to inherit their farm because they're
No,
women and they can't inherit
that's
it.
going to the closest male relative. Emma doesn't have that problem. Emma's going to get her father's house. She doesn't care if she ever gets married. It's a very different situation that Emma's in than Elizabeth Bennet is.
Is that why isn't her estate entailed?
There doesn't seem to be well, it's not entailed, but there doesn't seem to be a close male relative who's around to take
There's
it.
nobody to inherit.
Yeah, and she's going to have whatever she ends up with.
So so we're getting back kind of into the novel then, because that is one of the things that's really charming about Emma in that era, is that she has a kind of liberty
Yeah.
of thought and choice, because
Yeah.
she's going to inherit. So she is, especially for women's standards, she is rich. Like,
Yeah.
she's the richest of women because
Yeah.
she inherits and she doesn't have to marry somebody if she doesn't want to.
No, in fact, she she says very clearly at one point that she's got no intention of ever marrying. She says, "Were I to fall in love, indeed, it would be a very different thing, but I have never been in love. It is not my way or my nature, and I do not think I ever shall."
Right.
So she's not planning on...
Right.
She likes to match other people up,
Right.
but she's not planning on matching herself with anybody.
Well, and she sees herself as helpful and kind of, this fairy godmother in a way, like she's going to swoop in and help you get to your heart's desire. But Jane Austen is right in that Emma isn't entirely likable because she's controlling, she's manipulative, she thinks she knows best because
and expects everybody to kowtow to her.
Right, because of the environment in which she's been raised, where she was doted on and she doesn't have realities that curb those impulses.
Yeah,
right?
She's got a father who, doesn't ever do anything to correct her, and her governess was pretty lenient with her too.
Well, she probably read the room and realized that was the way to keep her job.
Yeah.
Well, in the movie, I'm sorry to go back to this, but the Clueless movie, the father is corrective. He is doting, and he tells her. She kind of returns it because she dotes also, but he criticizes her clothes, or he's like, "Don't do this," or he gives her life lessons and things like that.
Yeah, the only life lessons that Emma's father in the novel gives her are, you don't want to go out without your coat on. You might catch a cold.
Well,
you can't eat that. You have to eat something like gruel because it's got to be really bland or you might get sick.
Right.
He's a kind of hypochondriac and believes that everybody else thinks the way he does.
Right.
And thinks it's really not very nice to give them rich food or
because they won't want it.
Yeah, it'll just make them sick.
But then you can see how Emma acts that way too, in terms of, I think this and I'm right, because her father kind of approaches the world like that too. Like, I think this and everybody agrees.
Yeah.
Like, this is who we are.
They should agree anyway.
Right.
Yeah. And
this is how we go about life.
Yeah. And that's where Bill Nighy is so brilliant in that role, because he's just, it's almost a cartoon character.
Yeah. I think he's
that.
the one who can do it without it becoming, because he is so convincing doing those characters.
Yeah.
But
you talked about Emma's kind of good motives and also her kind of selfish motives in doing the things she does. And the two Emma movies, I think you really feel in the Gwyneth Paltrow one, that she plays Emma very sympathetically as somebody who really seems motivated by sincerely wanting to help her friends. And the Anya Taylor-Joy Emma seems more spoiled, and her machinations are maybe unconsciously motivated by her desire to exercise her own powers of manipulation.
I remember being more irritated by that, Emma, and also feeling that was a little closer to the book feeling.
Well,
because you get a little impatient in the book.
Yeah, you do.
With Emma.
But I think actually both of them can be
a reading.
A way you read the book. It has that kind of ambiguity about her character.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think she is motivated by good things. She wants good things for the people she loves.
Yeah.
Right? And she has agency to effect these good things to a certain degree. But it's that, going back to that Mad Men line, nobody knows what's wrong with themselves and everybody else can see it right away. Because Emma lacks some self-awareness.
Yeah, she does.
When it comes to how her actions actually do impact other people's lives and how they may hurt them.
Yeah, I mean, the worst of it is her adopting sort of Harriet Smith, who's this orphan, apparently, but she seems to have been an illegitimate child of somebody who had enough money to send her to this school, but she's a poor orphan, basically, and one that has no standing in society because she's illegitimate. And Emma believes that just because she takes her on as her project, she's worthy of marrying anybody
That Emma picks.
for her.
Right.
And it's Mr. Eldon, who's the clergyman in the village, that she sets her sight on. And when Robert Martin, who's a very respectable farmer on Mr. Knightley's estate, and very well thought of, he proposes to Harriet Smith, and Emma convinces her, "Oh, you don't ever want to marry him. He's just a farmer."
Right.
And
The snobbishness.
she's such a snob, and you just want to strangle her at that point.
Because these people really are attracted to each other and could be very happy together.
He's the perfect mate for her.
Right. And but it does also go back to the complexity of the fact that she is doing a good thing, because Harriet's situation is dire.
Yeah.
She could die, really, because she has no way to earn money. That, she has very limited ways of earning money that might keep her safe, right? Unless she finds a marital situation. Otherwise, I guess she could be a governess.
She could probably be a governess because she's going to that school.
She would really rely on people like Emma to help her even probably find placements like she's a very vulnerable person in this society.
Yeah.
And Emma, who has agency and power and influence, can help her, right? But it's the fact that she lacks enough self-awareness to see what Harriet actually wants.
Yeah. What Harriet wants doesn't matter.
Right. It's what I want to prove to myself, right? That I can get this great husband for this lowly woman, right?
Yeah. And Harriet, as it turns out, is a perfectly charming woman herself, but she's not of the class, and class is important in Austen.
Of course, and I would say that I don't remember does she aspire to that class, or is she just kind of pushed there? She's
pushed there by Emma, and Emma's grooming of her makes her desire that.
She builds in her these unrealistic expectations.
Yes, and the place where those expectations come out the strongest is toward the end of the novel, when Emma discovers that she has set her sights on Mr. Knightley.
Oh, that Harriet
has set
and
her
he's
sights.
the most.
He's the most
biggest
respected
prize of the county, right?
And the richest man in the county, an old friend of her family, who is kind of acted as her big brother for her whole life, and who advises her on things.
He's been invested in her
from the time she was a little girl.
Right.
Yeah.
And he has a big, as they say, country pile.
Yeah.
It's a large home.
He does.
He's got a land. He's got a lot of assets.
Yeah.
He's wealthy.
And Robert Martin works on his land.
Yes. So, yeah, it is really interesting, because then Freudian slip. Emma has to confront her own feelings of what is mine and what are you allowed to want.
Yeah.
She's groomed her to want Mr. Elton, who is kind of above her station, so to speak. Yeah. But she gets offended.
In some ways. Yeah. Actually, he's a real jerk.
Right.
But his class.
He's not a prize.
No.
But his class is elevated compared to Harriet's.
Yeah.
But then she finds herself offended by Harriet's desire for Mr. Knightley.
Yeah.
Because that, Emma feels, is a bridge too far.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting. And I think it's funny that Jane Austen wrote that people wouldn't like her because, it's that phenomenon, whether it's a hero or anti-hero, when it's the main character, you build some kind of sympathy or feeling for. That's why you can watch shows like The Sopranos and root for Tony. Yeah. And then you're like, what kind of monster am I? But it's because natural human empathy ties you to the main perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you root for Emma even while you're saying, oh, my God, Emma.
Yeah.
Slow your roll.
I mean, you don't root for Harriet to marry Mr. Elton, really.
Well, you don't want that for her.
Partly because he's a jerk. And, in fact, she really is too good for him.
Well, because good characters love each other, and they're being
Yeah.
kept apart by Emma's vanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she thinks she's doing it for good, but it is a way for her to see herself in a good light.
Yeah.
So there's a reward for her.
Yeah. The reward is going to be their gratitude to her.
Right.
For,
So she is a fascinating character, and what makes her unique in the true sense of the word is her financial situation at that time.
Yeah.
In that place.
yeah.
Why is it lovable to you? We've just been bitching about Emma.
Well, yeah. But Emma is really the character in the novel that has the most interesting character arc.
I was thinking that from the beginning.
Yeah.
She changes.
She changes quite a bit
Yeah.
as she gains in self-knowledge. And it's the mistakes that she makes that are brought home to her.
And she sees that other people are hurt.
Yeah.
How old is she again?
She's not even 21.
Oh.
She's
just a pup.
At least when the novel starts.
Right, she's just a
but
pup.
It doesn't cover too
No,
much
it's
time.
not very long.
Maybe a year or so.
Well, and in the Clueless movie, she's in high school. And I will say, on that spectrum of who's sympathetic, Alicia Silverstone's Emma, a.k.a. Cher, is sympathetic, but she's annoying because she is so rich.
Yeah.
And so she seems so vacuous, and she doesn't really worry about things. Like, one thing that annoys me about her is that she gets bad grades because she doesn't try that hard. She's very bright. And then when she gets a report card, she sees it as a beginning point for negotiation, and then goes back and talks her grades up, which to me, as a good student who follows the rules, is deeply offensive. Well, I would hate Emma if I were in school with Emma.
As someone who taught for 40-some years,
exactly,
I find that pretty offensive,
yes,
too.
As a teacher, I find it offensive as well. So that is something about that Emma iteration that is offensive. But even though it's modern, it's part of the fundamental Emma character, which is a kind of belief in her abilities to manipulate others for her own ends.
Yeah.
And that it is offensive, and that some of these other machinations are hurtful.
Yeah, or she's deceiving herself. She finds out, for instance, that Elton is actually trying to court her.
Yes.
And she never even thought of that
Love
possibility
triangle.
because she doesn't.
She's so unaware.
Yeah, she doesn't want to get married.
Right.
And so when he finds out that she wanted him to marry Harriet, he's a bigger snob than she is.
Right.
And he goes off somewhere and marries this other woman who's even more annoying than Emma. So it's like, okay, Emma's not that bad.
But doesn't she share his snobbery? His wife?
Yeah, she is
right?
a worse snob than he is.
They have similar values.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, the thing that makes Harriet want or admire Mr. Knightley is that at this dance that they have, Elton snubs her when he's looking for a partner in the dance, and she's the only one who doesn't have a partner, and he just kind of, I guess there's nobody here to dance with. And Knightley, who never dances, goes over and dances with her, and that
because he's a gentleman.
Because he's a gentleman,
and he's compassionate, and he actually has good manners, which manners and etiquette are about making everyone feel comfortable in the spaces that we share. It's not about showing someone you're better than them.
No, it's a gentleman does what he
exactly.
Did. And a gentleman is a class thing.
Exactly, and it pained him to see her there alone, so he was a gentleman as part of his class, which was above everybody.
Yeah, except possibly Emma.
Right.
She shows herself to be kind of a snob and some other things. But the worst thing that she does through the whole novel, well, I mean, it's pretty bad when she doesn't let Harriet marry Robert Martin. But
that's pretty bad.
But the worst specific thing that she does to somebody else is at the Box Hill picnic, because that's where...
Oh, yes.
Okay, she's flirting at the time with Frank Churchill.
Oh, okay.
Because he's he's living with and being raised by some relatives of his father. And so he's taken their name, but his name is Frank Churchill, and he occasionally comes to visit his father. And Emma believes, well, if I'm going to get married, he's probably the one to marry.
Right.
So she kind of flirts with him. And Jane Fairfax lives at the moment with her aunt and her grandmother, the Miss Bates.
And they're kind of silly.
Yeah, well,
chatty.
Yeah, the one is older, and she's basically a friend of Emma's father.
Yeah,
and is the only one that'll sit with him when he's staying home because he thinks it's a bad thing to go outside. But Miss Bates, she dotes on Jane Fairfax, her niece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she's always talking about her.
And always talking about her. And if she has a letter from her, she makes Emma sit down and she reads it to her all the time. But she's always chattering and saying kind of silly things. But she's an inoffensive woman, and she doesn't have any money herself, and so Mr. Knightley, for instance, and Emma too, kind of pay attention to her. But at the Box Hill picnic, Frank Churchill challenges everybody and says that Miss Woodhouse has asked me to order each of you to say either one very clever thing or two relatively clever things or three very stupid things. And Miss Bates says, oh, dear, well, I suppose I'm going to have to say three stupid things because I can't think of anything clever. And Emma says, well, but you have to limit yourself to only three.
Yeah, it's awful. She's awful.
Yeah,
she's awful.
She thinks this is funny. And it's kind of greeted with shock by most of the people there.
It would only be funny if Miss Bates were clever and could get the joke of it, right?
Yeah.
But what she got was, I only say stupid stuff, and everybody thinks so.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where Mr. Knightley takes Emma aside and tells her, this was really, really badly
because
done.
As a gentleman, he is deeply offended by her behavior because she is not making the people in her space comfortable and welcome.
Yeah.
She makes Miss Bates feel self-conscious and silly
and humiliated. And he is telling her, you need to be like I am. Basically.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself, Emma.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that is a pivotal kind of moment for her learning curve.
Yeah, that's one of the big turning points for her when he corrects her. Talking about movies, it's Jeremy Bentham.
Yeah,
I think plays Knightley in the Gwyneth Paltrow movie, and he does it with a lot of restraint and a lot of class. Mm-hmm. The guy who plays Knightley in the more recent movie is Johnny Flynn, who I think is known as a singer and not as an actor necessarily. Yeah. But he puts a lot of emotion into
he's more volatile. He feels less,
which is not at all like
it wouldn't have
like
been
the Knightley in the book.
Acceptable, really, in that for him really, to act in that way.
Yeah,
not an oldest son anyway.
It's really not consistent with the novel.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's also important that given the class situation of the people in the novel, the characters and how they relate to each other, only Knightley is really situated to provide feedback to Emma. Harriet's not going to be able to give that to her.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it has to be somebody above her.
Or at least equal to her.
Or at least equal. And also somebody more confident.
Yeah.
She's confident. Sometimes she's arrogant because she's young and she doesn't take other people's feelings into account. And she isn't aware of why she's doing things, right?
Yeah.
And I think confidence has to do more with self-awareness, right? I understand why I am doing this. And she's young. She doesn't have that yet. And she doesn't have a lot of structuring feedback.
Yeah. One of the other things that shows her lack of self-awareness, I think, is she doesn't like Jane Fairfax.
No, she's impatient whenever Miss Bates talks about her because she doesn't like her.
and when she comes to stay with them, she's really has to kind of grit her teeth to go visit. But it's because she's so jealous of her. And
she's a rival in a way.
yeah, because Emma plays the piano and sings the way well-brought-up girls are supposed to do.
She's not particularly artistic or compelling.
Well, she also paints,
right?
But she's not a great
She does these
artist.
Things because girls do them.
Yeah, and she does a decent job with her singing and her playing and her painting. She paints a portrait of Harriet Smith, in fact. But Jane Fairfax is a virtuoso performer on the piano and in singing.
Jane is her high school nemesis.
Yes, exactly.
We all have one.
And Emma actually is able to kind of admit to herself that she's just jealous of her.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a step toward
That's
her
part of her arc as well.
Yeah.
Well, also, we haven't really mentioned this, but I think we can't let it go without saying that Jane Austen's language is delightful. So any book you read by her is a joy because the language is, it's so carefully wrought, and each sentence is so precise, but it doesn't read as fussy, right? So it feels very natural, and it creates this whole world.
Yeah, there's also an irony in a lot of her language.
She's arch. We talked about this with Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, there's so many places where you can see Emma fooling herself by the language that she uses to herself. There's a really interesting sentence in the book toward the end where Austen writes, "Seldom, very seldom, does complete truth belong to any human disclosure. Seldom can it happen that something is not a little disguised or a little mistaken."
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's these really wonderful kernels of insight, right, in the book.
Yeah.
And they're compelling because they're part of this plot that's taking place. I would say as a qualitative researcher that Austen is a participant observer of her social station. She's at home in it, but she has enough self-awareness, as the theme of the episode, to separate herself from it so that she can be critical of things within it that deserve criticism.
Yeah.
She isn't a cheerleader, like an unapologetic, 100% all-in cheerleader for this world she lives in. She sees its weaknesses.
Yeah.
She sees how it hurts people.
Yeah.
And she uses her incredibly deft storytelling to illustrate that.
Yeah, and it may have something to do with her personal situation. She's an unmarried woman living with relatives, and so she's not completely in the situation. She's always kind of a little outside,
because she didn't
it.
do what she was supposed to do, which is get married.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then she wouldn't have been able to write the novels, obviously, because she would have had other obligations, probably, depending on her station. Right?
Yeah, so thank God she didn't get married.
Well, research often suggests that women who do not get married are happier than women who do. Not this one, I'm happy. I didn't want you to take it.
You heard it, folks.
I'm happy. But, yeah, it's kind of an interesting way that it's like Edith Wharton, who was part of that world and yet took it to task because
part of that world 100 years later.
Well, she was part of the world she wrote about, is what I meant. And she took it to task because she had achieved some distance as an outsider because she got divorced and she didn't have any children. So her life path took her, she was kind of parallel with these people. So she could watch and observe. And that gives her books, so much depth because she's aware of herself as the observer, I think. So, awesome. Well, I have trouble, so I need to ask you this question because I don't know the answer. Who might not like Emma? Or why might people not like Emma?
Well, I think Austen said it herself. She's writing a book about a character that not many people are going to like.
Right.
And I think if you don't like Emma herself, or you have a really kind of negative reaction to her, you might not like the book.
And
or at least you might not like it as much as some others.
if you don't like this world and, the rich recreation of this place and time and people, then, Austen's books aren't going to be for you really at all if that's not something you're interested in.
I mean, it's not like there's a lot of exciting action.
Right.
If that's what you're looking for. It's a comedy of manners, basically, as all her books are.
I was going to say it has to do with that kind of focus. So, but it is, I think at least one Austen book should be on everybody's list to see if you like it. You may not think you will, and you might be surprised.
At least two.
At least two. These two.
These two in particular.
Because they're lovable. So that brings us to, where are you going to rank this novel on your list of the 100 most lovable books in the English language?
Well, it's crowded near the top, and I do like Pride and Prejudice more than Emma, but I really like them both. I think maybe I would put this as number 11.
Ooh, so quite high.
So right after The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and right before David Copperfield.
Because she's going to be with her Dickensian friend.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's wonderful. It was fun to talk about Emma and the movies. I'm sorry, I can't separate them. They live together in my head.
Well, speaking of what's in your head, I believe it must be time for Chaos Reader.
Well, I'm going to be very chaotic today because I did finish Good Material by Dolly Alderton. I think that's her name. It's a British novel, and I really loved it. For a while, I was kind of like, why was this one of the best New York Times best novels? I mean, it's enjoyable to read. It's very clever. I'm enjoying it. But then by the time I finished it, I was like, ooh, okay, I get it. It switches perspective at the end, and I don't want to say too much, but I loved it. I just loved it. So I actually want to be really chaotic and take a minute to mention that we talk about on here, at the end about sharing our podcasts with other people who like books, right? That's a good way to grow our podcast, is for our listeners who like it, to share it with somebody that they know also likes books. And I just wanted to say that my brother Ben Jones, who's the state historian for South Dakota, texted me a couple of weeks ago because he shared our podcast on A Prayer for Owen Meany. He sent it to his friend who had recommended the book to him originally in the 1990s when my brother Ben was living on Guam in the Air Force. And he sent the podcast link to his friend and said, you recommended this book to me, and here's my sister and her husband have a podcast, and here's a discussion. And his friend wrote back and said, wow, what a great podcast, and thanks for sending it. And so I just thought that was really touching, that, that book meant a lot to my brother. And it meant so much to him that he remembered the person who recommended it to him. And because they're still in contact, he was able to share it with him. So that was something I read, the text chain. But I wanted to mention that because also Ben has a podcast. It's called History 605, which is about the history of South Dakota. South Dakota is small enough in population that it has one area code, 605. But it's not just about South Dakota history. It's about all kinds of, things that involve South Dakota involve the nation, right? So it's a really great podcast, all kinds of topics, from Citibank to Mount Rushmore. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because his sharing of the podcast in that way is, that's kind of what I dream of for our podcast, is that somebody who hears a book that they love shares it with someone they know loves the book. So
yeah,
bringing people together. Yeah,
that's what we're for.
That's what we're for. All right. Well, we want to thank you and remind you to share the podcast. And we thank our podcast production sensei, Jerry Bruno, who helped us with something just this weekend. And we'd like to thank all of our listeners from the United States and South Dakota and all over the world, which is exciting to see that list every week. And we'll see you next week. Between the covers.